what did I oversleep? I just woke up. What did I miss? In all seriousness, it has been one of my token lapses in updates. It happens, you know. I got grown-up stuff going on. What are you gonna do? Welcome back to Ground Zero Salem. It's Pat once again with a big old stack of mostly metal CDs, mostly 80s and 90s stuff. I talked about a lot of 2020 releases, past couple updates months back at this point. Sorry, 2022. What year is it? It's COVID year. That's what it is. How skewed is everybody's perception of how time is passing? Anyway, 2022 releases, I meant to say. Now I have a bunch of reissues. Some of these are fairly obscure, unearthed gems, unearthed Arcana. Some of these are pretty well known if you're into underground metal, but it's mostly metal. Mostly thrash and speed metal. I've been on a big thrash binge up until pretty recently. And like Crucial Unit said, thrashing is my business and business is mediocre at best. So we're just hanging out. I'm spinning. Speaking of thrash, not full-on thrash. This experiments with a little bit more extreme genres here and there. A little bit of black, a little bit of death. But this is Frontal Assault. I believe they're from Iowa. The imprint is from Iowa. Brand new label from my buddy Grimmtooth, who is the guy who runs Grimmtooth's Very Metal Things, which is a catalog distro. You can order a physical catalog, go over it with a highlighter like I did. He's got a lot of good stuff. Distros mostly at first he was doing tapes. Now he's doing some LPs and CDs. But if you're interested in the link, I will post it below if I can find it. It's on Instagram if you just look it up. But solid Midwestern dude. Put out this CD. Yeah, I'm really enjoying it so far. It's like kind of more or less black and thrash. There's a strong Teutonic kind of thing to it. Kind of a lighthearted approach lyrically, not musically. I really dig this like early 2000s hip hop Photoshop inlay there. That's a lot of fun. So that's cool. And let's get into it. Like a lot of collectors on YouTube and otherwise, older people, older folks, you know, us geriatrics. A lot of it with me is kind of trying to track down the diamonds in the rough, you know, the obscure stuff that I missed first time around. I tend to lean into and gravitate towards labels like R.A.V.A.G.E that reissue a lot of stuff, sometimes Memento Mori. There's a bunch. Dive Bomb. All those are included in this. And there's also some heavy hitters in here that just, I have vinyl, I have tapes, but most of them are beat to shit, so it's time to re-up. At the top of the pile, I got one of these LPs a year or two ago. I'd never heard them before that, but I picked up on vinyl Trouble Within by Juggernaut. This is a 2 CD collection that has Trouble Within and Baptism Under Fire. This is kind of emerging out of traditional heavy metal, speed thrash kind of stuff, but with a very technical bent to it, technical and progressive. I feel like there might have been something in the water in Texas during the 80s, because it bred these guys, of course Watchtower, who were massively influential, very ahead of their time, and Arcane, who are also pretty progressive for what at the time was like leaning into extreme sort of metal. Trouble Within is a really cool record. I like it a lot. I like both. Trouble Within features the vocalist that was in San Antonio Slayer. He's a great set of pipes on that guy. I think he's no longer with us. R.I.P. But overall, it's a good collection of like, yeah, technically leaning, kind of speed thrash metal stuff. Wailing, soaring vocals, really interesting kind of complex riffs and that kind of shit. Then on R.A.V.A.G.E. This is an interesting story behind this. This is a Swedish band called Incardine, Seeds of Doom. This is one of those releases that never saw the light of day until much, much later. They were pretty renowned as a demo band. One of their members went on to be, I believe, a member of Unleashed, like third or fourth or fifth album in, something like that. And they kind of prided themselves, I think them and Seance were like the main, hey, we don't want to just do the HM2 Trempic buzzsaw thing. We listen to American bands too. I think to a certain extent early Hypocrisy was also like kind of American influence. And Incardine is no exception to that. You can hear the Swedish influence for sure, but there's a good amount of like brutal Tampa kind of stuff. There's like some almost probably coincidentally sort of like metallic hardcore breakdown sounding parts in it. Really great production for the time. But this got shelved. The guy that was originally supposed to put it out fucked up somehow, and it just never got released until... And it was very limited when it did get released, I think about 10 or 15 years ago. And finally, the fine people at Vic scooped it up, put it into a nice package there. There's demos. Yeah, this is a great 90s death metal record that, you know, didn't see the light of day until recently. Then we've got a Outrage demos collection, also on Vic. If you've been listening to a ton of Hellhammer, a ton of early Bathory, and you want to round up maybe the Teutonic demos, you know, Sodom and Destruction demos, and you want something also really rough that you maybe haven't heard yet, that's like proto-black metal, first wave, shitty, falling apart, chaotic, ineptly played thrash that's really evil, look no further than the Outrage demos. Definitely along those lines. Certainly if you like those Teutonic demos, it's almost as sloppy as Hellhammer, almost as gnarly as that really early Poison from Germany stuff. I'd seen the logo floating around. I knew the band like was of note and of influence. They came, one of those bands that got back together and did a ton of stuff in the mid 2000s. Haven't heard that stuff. The EP after this is really good, name of which is escaping me, but this is solid proto-black, first wave black metal stuff, demo stuff. I am out of practice because my throat is already hoarse and I've only talked about like 3 releases. All I wanted was a Pepsi. Band that I sort of deep dove on a bit, didn't get every single record, but a while ago, 2 or 3 years ago, I read that Finnish death metal book, and that always sends me on a wormhole whenever I read any kind of like scene biography or anything like that. I immediately hop online, start buying stuff, start downloading YouTube links, and go on Soulseek. You know, I just want to research all the stuff that I missed. This is no exception. I didn't pull the trigger on this band for a while because I kind of forgot about it. In the Finnish death metal book, I went after all the death metal bands and death thrash bands like R.A.V.A.G.E, but I remember a lot of talk over this really, really popular in Finland thrash metal band called Stone. This is Emotional Playground. This is the 3rd or 4th release by Stone. They don't have a bad record. I've listened to them all. They have like 4 or 5 albums. This is leaning more into like a weird, cold, technical, kind of Voivod or Coroner direction in terms of sound. If you like that stuff, this will certainly wet your whistle. It's great. Their early stuff is a little bit more like Bay Area. Their self-titled and the No Anesthesia record. Those are both really good. I also have this live record, which covers pretty much their initial run. It's very well recorded. It's a pretty decent intro to the band. Everything's pretty clear in the mix. I'm not sure if there's overdubs or not. Who cares? A little flat sounding, you know, so the catchier parts quite aren't as catchy, but it's still really good. So yeah, Stone. I'd heard a lot of people sing their praises. I just was sleeping on it for forever. Then we've got the Mayhem, one of the many Mayhems. This is not NYC Mayhem, nor is it the Mayhem from Norway, obviously. This is Mayhem from Portland, Oregon. Burned Alive. This features the Slayer hippie, former drummer of Poison Idea, again, no longer with us, R.I.P. to fantastic producer as well as a sick drummer, and he is destroying the kit on this. This is an interesting mix of styles. Some of the songs, a few of them, a handful of them, lean into like still metal but kind of weirdly punk, and not necessarily the type of punk you'd expect to mix with a speed metal band. It's almost sort of Ramonesy and catchy in that way on a few tracks. It feels like a little awkward, but their raging songs are just that. They're full-on raging. It's very motor-charged. He definitely sounded like a punk drummer playing in a metal band even then, just pounding the skins. Got that real kind of dischargey sort of thing going on with the drums. Fully using the toms and bruising and abusing the toms. And this came out on US Metal, it looks like. There are a ton of these up on eBay if you're interested for really cheap. The same seller is selling Wild Dogs. That's another Portland classic early 80s metal band for, I mean, the CDs are like $7 or $8 a pop, so it's worth it if you like that sort of stuff. It's really, really good. Then I got nostalgic for this record, wanted to revisit it, Divine Intervention by Slayer. I had a Polish bootleg of it, and I decided to buy a newer copy, sent my old copy on to good old Grimmtooth there. I remember when this came out, I remember thinking it was pretty good, but my life was moving in different directions. I'm trying to think, this was like 94 or something like that. Yeah, 94, so it's getting more into brutal stuff, Death Doom and shit like that at the time. This did deliver, but there were a few moments that kind of nosedive for me. 213, that's topical with all the Dahmer stuff being big again. But man, the raging tracks on this are so good. The opening track, Killing Fields, Sex Murder Art, I mean Ditto Head, which is like pretty much should have been on Undisputed Attitude. It could have been one of those tracks, you know, it's like almost a straight up hardcore song. Probably their last really great one. Some of those those 2000 records, post-crappy records are okay. I need to revisit those. Christ Illusion and all that stuff. I don't even remember what those really sound like. I remember them sounding like decent Fast Slayer, but just there was something missing, something magic missing with those. I'll get around to checking them out again sooner or later. And then I kind of got sucked into, and this doesn't really fit in with the Unearthed, maybe an Unearthed gem, but more recent than the 90s. This is a 2000s band that I just kind of threw in the pile here, just because I'm excited to talk about them. I'd heard the name mentioned a few times, probably heard about them through another YouTuber, Brain Smasher, or somebody that's really into black metal, I guess. But Sauron from Michigan, from the Detroit area, I got all their releases. The Thrash Assault EP with a demo tacked on there, compact disc, is probably my favorite. There's a lot of black thrash that I like. I like all the heavy hitters. I like R.A.V.A.G.E. and Niflheim and all that stuff. But there's something about this that feels almost true to just being like really evil thrash without much of a second wave black metal influence, I want to say. It feels organically evil, straight up thrash metal that's more German influence than anything else. And I realized that all that's kind of muddy waters. It all kind of bleeds into each other. But Sauron executes it really well. Just feral, vicious, almost falling apart, going off rails, blackened thrash stuff. So there's the Thrash Assault, and there's Satanic Assassins, which came out 2006, a couple years later. And then they didn't do anything for, I don't know if it was a full 10 years, but it was quite a while. I think this came out in 2016 or something like that. Well into the mid-2010s. You had Conquest, Attrition. And I was expecting this to maybe not be great. Maybe they're trying to go in a different direction. You know, the cover art's a little fancier, a little photoshopped. Still looks good, though. Free bowl of soup. Still looks good, though. And, no, it's exactly, I mean, it's a little bit more polished than the others, but not much. It's straight up snarling feral thrash of the black variety on this as well. Then Attitude Adjustment. This is the collection, so it's pretty much everything Attitude Adjustment did under that name. I know that they were members were in a band called Attitude that was pretty much the same thing at one point, but this is just everything under the banner of Attitude Adjustment. They're a Bay Area band. They get kind of pigeonholed as crossover. They do have a lot of metal trappings on their debut, American Paranoia, which is an all-time favorite of mine. Hardcore, crossover, whatever you want to call it. It's a fantastic record. I will say that there's not a lot of flash to them. They don't have like really long songs or solos or anything. Just really tight, like tightly picked kind of thrashy guitar. And then later on, they get a little bit more, I'd say a little bit more metal, a little bit more fleshed out and beefy recording as well. What sounds like a different vocalist too, with like a deeper, gruffer, almost kind of Midwest or like Boston hardcore kind of vocal approach later on, as opposed to the snottiness of American Paranoia. But yeah, awesome band. I have some of their other stuff. Their demo's really good even, dead serious. Okay, so this is very, very much of the time. This is the demo collection for a band called Cold Steel from New Jersey. And I mean, you got a peace symbol made out of skulls. There's your first tip off there. 20 years of New York thrash. Okay, they're from New York. Warning, demo recordings, raw metal inside. They also had an album called, like, I want to say, like, Freak Boy or something like that. I can't remember the name exactly, but this is very, very emblematic of thrash metal from the Northeast, from the late 80s, early 90s. Demos are from 88 to 90. There's some slappy bass on there that's almost leaning into funk metal, not quite, but you can definitely hear the thumb going away there. Also, like, very, like, Belladonna, Joey Belladonna influence kind of vocals. It's certainly the lighter side of thrash. You can tell they're thrash guys, but they've probably been listening to a lot of Faith No More, Chili Peppers, that kind of stuff. This came out on Stormspell, so yeah, it's got its moments. Not really what I'm craving all the time. Probably named after that Nuclear Assault song, you know. Very, very, like, New Jersey, New York thrash, 88 to 90, you know. We're gonna make it, ma! Then we've got Ruthless Horde. This is really interesting. This is a demo anthology. This band's American. I am spacing out on where they were from exactly. This is a really cool kind of cross-section of evil-sounding metal. It's weird because listening to just the first demo, it sounds like several different demos. There's several different approaches. At their most vicious, they kind of sound a lot like Hell Awaits era Slayer, or some kind of Metal Blade satanic stuff between 83 and 85. Really, really vicious speed metal stuff. And then on a few songs, that aforementioned, like, late 80s kind of weirdness creeps in just a touch, like, rhythmically. But then they also have clean vocaled, almost, I wouldn't say doomy, but, like, heavily influenced by, like, Merciful Fate kind of influence creeping in there, which is cool. So there's, I mean, it's only 7 songs, but there's a lot going on with this band, and apparently this is their entire recorded output. So very, very cool stuff. I'm just going to play this over again because it's short. We're still listening to Frontal Assault, which means I've already been talking for a half an hour. Oh dear. So next up we got this Doomstone CD. And this was another one of those, like, I read a book, went on a deep dive, and bought some stuff kind of deals. I picked this up, this Death Vomit death metal fanzine collection. Omnibus from Evil Speak. I'll leave a link for it if you want to check it out. It's great. It's a very, you know, prolific zine that, well, not prolific, really. If by prolific I mean like 5 issues. It was a good, well-researched, well-written zine that was around between 88 and 91. That was a guy that was centered in, like, the DC, Baltimore scene. So there's a lot of focus around, like, Deceased and all that stuff. He played in this band, Doomstone. And I was like, oh yeah, I think I've heard that name. I want to check it out. It features members that went on to October 31, if you like them. And it's cool. It's kind of like Acid Witch before Acid Witch. And I think I prefer it to Acid Witch, if I'm being honest. It's death metal, actually more so black metal, kind of shrieky black metal vocals. Heavy tones, you know, pretty crushing riffs and everything, but influenced a lot by Black Sabbath. A lot of doom metal stuff, kind of weirdly psychedelic and horror influenced. Certainly like a more serious, less goofy Acid Witch, basically. A little bit more on the raw side, a little bit more black metal for sure. It's really good. I think I'd heard the name, maybe. And that was about it. I also picked up the Primeval discography CD, but I haven't really sunk my teeth into it that much, so I don't have that much to say about it. But it's cool, like thrashy proto death metal stuff as well. I got some Dive Bomb releases here. I got the State of Mind Mass Persecution CD. This was a band from Minneapolis. Solidly thrash metal stuff. There's a pretty extensive interview with them in there. They're pretty interesting. They were a thrash metal band, a three-piece, mostly socio-political kind of lyrics, decently technical. They remind me a little bit of The Crucified on their second or third album, Pillars of Humanity. The music is technical in the sense that it's thrash metal, and all thrash metal is inherently technical, I believe. But it's, it's not too flashy or too fancy, but vocally it's way more of like a hardcore approach. It's decent. The production, this only came out on cassette back in the day. It was like a professionally released cassette release. And maybe it's something in the transfer, but it sounds really flat. I feel like if there was something in the production that brought the levels to different peaks or something, it would kind of jump at you a little bit better. But musically, it's really solid. I wouldn't call it crossover. If it were to be called that, it would be only the vocals that make it that way, because they're more of a hardcore shout. The music's solidly, probably not technical by today's standards, but thrash. Then you got Visitor. One of my commenters recommended this to me. I will post a screen grab of the recommendation. I forget the name. Commenter on my 90s thrash video that I did a while back now said, hey, do you know any of these? And I only knew one of them, which was Anchorwatt. I knew Anchorwatt, but he recommended a bunch more. And this Visitor was one of them. Self-titled record, also got released on Dive Bomb. Sounds a lot reminds me a lot of Anthrax. It says here for fans of Realm, Sanctuary, and Kinetic Descent. I don't remember what Realm sounds like. It's way more aggressive and almost way moshier than Sanctuary. I'd say there's some progressive elements like that, but to me it's more of kind of like a less goofy, more straightforward, more metallic, straightforward metal kind of version of Anthrax. There's some attempts at social commentary on this as well. There's a song about cops called Johnny Law and stuff like that. But this is and the production on this is really punchy, in your face, really, really good thrash metal stuff. Then I went on a little side bender of kind of technical death metal stuff, just the beginnings of it. Certainly the technicality that got kind of overblown in death metal was a turnoff. Metal is kind of technical enough for me as it is. I don't need to hear, especially overproduced stuff with trigger drums, all that stuff brain drill and all that just totally misses me. Even the more metalcore side of things, like Dillinger Escape Plan, the really mathy, wanky shit, it's just not my deal. But the beginnings of it were pretty interesting. And lesser known band, this came out on Memento Mori, a bunch of demos between 92 and 94. Crossfade, Return to Planet Hell. This was a Long Island band, definitely part of that same scene with Afterbirth and Internal Bleeding and all that stuff, but they leaned more into kind of a spacey progressive sort of deal. Certainly if you like Atheist and Cynic and that kind of stuff, this will be up your alley. It also kind of reminds me of the very, very, very beginnings of metalcore. The beginnings of when Creation is Crucifixion and bands like that were kicking off. It almost kind of reminds me of that stuff a little bit, really early Willowtip a little bit. But yeah, cool. Check that out, Crossfade. Kind of sounds like a hardcore band name too. Carrying on with lesser known proggy death metal stuff. I also got this. I love this cover art. I'm pretty sure it's just stolen from a comic book or something. Also on Dive Bomb, this is Epitaph. Florida death metal band. Echoes Entombed, the demo anthology, 91 to 92. Effectively just 5 songs. A 3-song demo and a 2-song demo. There's also some remixes of the first demo at the end of this, which is kind of unnecessary, but hey, gotta fill up a CD, I guess. But yeah, this band was around. They're a Florida band, here for a cup of coffee. Vocals are very similar to John Tardy. John Tardy also guest does guest vocals on the first song, so that's confusing. You don't really know who's singing. It's good though. This is yeah, I mean, it's got that sort of like early Cynic, early Atheist kind of thing. Actually, it reminds me, with that vocal style, it reminds me a lot of Viogression from Milwaukee. It's very like, they managed to rein the technicality in and actually use it for a purpose of songwriting and everything, which is great. But yeah, unfortunately, only around for a couple of demos and then they were done. Speaking of Atheist and Cynic, how's that for a segue? I got this Cynic demos compilation right here. Been meaning to pick this up for a while. You know, it's got the legendary Ouroboros Forms demo. It's also the name of this whole compilation. Ouroboros Forms. And it's cool hearing their beginnings because they were essentially like a technical thrash kind of unit before they got heavier and heavier and probably were listening to like their compatriots in Death and stuff like that. But a lot of it was more of a lighter kind of techie thrash sort of thing. Early on you could hear the wild bass influence and everything going on. But yeah, I mean, this right here is probably my favorite material by Cynic. I don't really go too far into their album stuff. This is perfect for me. And I got Atheist Piece of Time. I have the LP of this, but I wanted the CD mostly because I wanted the R.A.V.A.G.E demo and the early Atheist demos as well. Their bassist that passed away after this was his name, Roger Patterson, I think. He was great. Super good. He was a fantastic bassist and seemed to really walk his own path. I don't really know too much about his passing or anything like that. Just noticed that, I don't know if it's like intentional or not, but he's like the super punk looking one. But yeah, awesome band. I don't really go too far past this with Atheist either, to be honest. It's Unquestionable Presence is cool, but they, like a lot of stuff that's very technical, kind of lose me after a while. And I meant to throw this in the pile earlier, but it ended up here. Pyracanda, Two Sides of a Coin. German band. This has got to be... It's got to be the same artist that did Release from Agony by Destruction, right? Yeah, German band, but way more, I'd say, American sounding than Teutonic. It's a lot slicker, a lot more melodic, less snarly. Certainly not leaning in like any kind of death metal direction or extreme metal direction. Very well executed thrash metal, though. Yeah, definitely if you're into Testament and that kind of stuff, this is along those lines. Early Testament, though, like first two albums. I think that's kind of the thing, too, is this came out in 89 or 90, and by that time, a lot of the American thrash metal bands that pioneered this sound were slowing down, getting a groove or whatever. It was kind of cool that there were some European bands kind of still carrying the torch to rip it up, you know, thrash it up, so to speak. Kind of like when the UK hardcore bands in the late 80s were doing American hardcore better than the American hardcore bands they were ripping off, like Ripcord and that kind of stuff. Then we've got, speaking of American hardcore bands, the crossover, or even more of a like straight up thrash metal record by Wasted Youth, Black Days. There's been a couple of really good streams talking about crossover from all your favorite YouTubers. Marty did one. Also, Dennis at Analog Archives did one. Marty's, he had Mike from Uncommon Pallor and Eric Bauer on, and that was a really great discussion to watch. And this got brought up. I think Mike mentioned it, or maybe it was Eric. I don't remember. But it's a great record. There's moments of sort of like sleazy rock and roll kind of peeking in there, but it is very much like, feels like a Venice kind of thrash record, which makes sense because that's generally, I don't know if they're from Venice. I think they were from somewhere else in LA, but it's got that sort of LA thrash crossover kind of vibe to it. You know, Beowulf and Excel and Suicidal and all that kind of stuff. With a little bit of rock and roll stank on it. This was a repurchase for me. It's a mid-2000s release. I bought it back in the day in Florida, and this was too metal for me at the time, I think, and I got rid of it, but it's very good. It was an Italian band called Hatework, thrash and roll, and that's pretty much what it is. It's got certain trappings of thrash metal, you know, that really tight, choked up on the E kind of picking, but it's got a nice sort of Motorhead kind of groove to it. It's a lot of fun. There weren't too many bands that were doing thrash metal back then that were well known. There was a ton of stuff in South America, I think, that was keeping the flame alive in more of a black metal kind of direction. And there was the new wave of crossover stuff sort of starting to take off with Bones Brigade and Municipal Waste. But you didn't hear as much about thrash metal back then. I think a lot of people were propping up the Crown and stuff like that as like the rebirth of thrash at the time. So I was looking for anything that kind of reminded me of shit that I listened to while growing up. And I picked this up, and I kind of regretted getting rid of it. And I'm glad I am reacquainted with it. Alright, so now we have a bunch of reissues from Hammerheart. So this is kind of the section of stuff that's relatively well known. This is a new wave of British heavy metal band I don't think I was too familiar with. Avenger Bloodsports. I saw this in a distro and I said, yeah, it's kind of like taking the Raven athletic rock thing and making it more like Thunderdome and post-apocalyptic, it looks like. Spiked football helmet and a chainsaw. And it's very, very leaning into almost like a Venom level new wave of British heavy metal. It's almost extreme enough to be speed metal or thrash metal, but still, you know, new wave of British heavy metal kind of stuff. It's definitely not on the boogie rock side of new wave of British heavy metal, so if you're looking for something pretty fist pumping and adrenaline pumping, check it out. Gas pumping. Therion, Beyond Sanctorum. I always wanted to hear this because I knew it was more or less a transitionary record between Of Darkness, which is a fantastic death metal record and nothing quite like it really as far as Swedish stuff goes. Another outlier Swedish death metal before they changed their sound drastically. I knew that it was sort of transitionary. I know that after this they got really operatic. I've never heard that stuff. Doesn't seem like something I'd be into. Maybe I'll... If I'm feeling froggy, maybe I'll check it out on YouTube or something. But I knew that this was still kind of death metal, so I picked it up. And it's interesting. You know, it's almost like a weird, really weird Swedish take on some of the doom death stuff that was going on at the time. There are, again, I think unintentional tough guy hardcore breakdowns in this, like coincidental meathead breakdowns that are just, they're going for like heavy riffs. But to me, it almost kind of sounds like Bulldoze. I am probably alone in that observation. But yeah, it's not too dissimilar. It's a little bit more straightforward than Of Darkness. There's a lot more kind of like, you know, non-standard instrumentation, keyboard weirdness kind of going on, and a few other kind of arty touches, but they're not full-on opera stuff yet. It's a cool record. I'm happy with that. Trouble, Revelations of the Insane, Demos and Rarities. This is a 2-disc one. Hammerheart, I think it came out this year. So if you're a Troublehead, if you're a deep Troublehead, I recommend this because it has one CD that's all the demos from the 80s, pretty much. There's like Live from a Cable Show. There's unreleased recordings on here. But there's a lot of tracks you'd recognize. Demon's Claw, Tempter, Revelation, all that stuff. And then CD2 has a 1994 recording and a 1993 recording. Some stuff that I think might be completely unreleased. I recognize a few tracks from way later on. I don't even have those records, like the Distortion Fields or all that stuff, that Mind Condition record. But these are kind of, you know, not super raw, like pretty well-produced studio demos with, they weren't happy with them for whatever reason, obviously, with that kind of later Trouble stuff that's a little bit more groovy, a little bit more stonery, you know, than their early Metal Blade shit. So definitely if you like the self-titled, you know, and that kind of stuff. I haven't even heard that Green Head record or whatever it is. Fatal, Soul Burning Still, a Fatal Retrospective. Coincidentally, I just happened to like get into a bunch of Michigan metal at the same time. This and Sauron. Fatal, I have a 7-inch of theirs. They were a Michigan, like, early death metal band that kind of emerged from thrash. This is great stuff. All these demos are really, really good. I think it would appeal to fans of, like, early Death and Autopsy. but it doesn't really sound directly like anything. Like, they're very much their own sound, and it's excellent. It's a great package. I mean, if Hammerheart is going to reissue all this stuff, you know, the quality's probably quite good. Brought up, I think, on both of the crossover streams was Wehrmacht. I have one of these on tape and one of these on LP, and they're both kind of beat up, so decided I needed them. Wehrmacht and Shark Attack. I'd say Shark Attack is a little bit more like wild and crazy sounding. Like, revisiting it when I ripped it to my cloud and put it on in the car, it's a lot faster than I remember it. I bought the LP like over 10 years ago and listened to it a bunch at the time and just kind of forgot about it. Forgot how like kind of out of control fast it is. Not quite blast beat fast, but like, you got to keep in mind also these guys went on to be in Spastic Blur, who had a lot of like borderline grind stuff. It's pretty nuts. This is a little bit more like solid kind of like mosh tempos. I wouldn't say tamed down, but a little bit more controlled violence, I'd say. And there's plenty of bonus material on both of these. There's the thrash metal demo rehearsal from '85, some live tracks on this one. This has the Wehrmacht demo, rehearsal, live in Portland. And these guys were a Portland band, as far as I remember. Oh, I just realized the graffiti in the background says Spastic Blur there. Huh. Alright. You know, band that probably should be mentioned more often in the crossover discussion, I'd say. Like, really, really great. Intense crossover stuff. Another example of just, like, quality thrash metal that was kind of a little bit late to the party, which is something that I'm clearly kind of obsessed with. I always saw this band on thanks lists all the time, especially on creator thanks lists and a lot of the German bands. This is a Swedish band, Mezzrow. Then Came the Killing. I also remember these folks being mentioned in the Swedish death metal book quite a bit, of this discussion about the divide between the new up-and-coming bands like Nihilist and these guys, and like Hexenhaus, who are, you know, a little bit behind the times, still playing technical thrash, or as they called it over there, techno thrash. Not to be confused with like Screw or Ministry or something, I guess. But yeah, it's technical, but again, like I said, it's technical for its time. Great riffs, catchy, cool, you know, kind of got a Bay Area sort of thing. You know, FFO Testament. Not really too much else to say other than that. Not super exciting, but it is a really, really solid record. Then, I mentioned I got the other one. This is the first Invocator record, Excursion Demise. This is a gorgeous piece of very, very heavy thrash metal brutality. Includes lots of bonus stuff, all kinds of demos. Netherlands band, Holland, I believe. Fucking awesome. Awesome. I mean, anybody that is, you know, spouting off about how great Exhorters, Slaughter in the Vatican is, this is every ounce as good. Very similar kind of style. Brutal, thick, perfect sounding guitars, throaty vocals, just an overwhelming amount of riffs. Just an avalanche, a cavalcade, if you will, of riffage coming for your ass. So good. Then I got two by this band, Sacrosanct. Also from that part of the world. Contained a member of Pestilence. Can't remember who. I think it was a guitarist. So I got this one first, and this bored the crap out of me. It's slow, kind of proggy, you know, I'd say that sort of like mature metal, early 90s sort of thing. Like, I mean, I like Sanctuary, but it's kind of along those lines. It almost reminds me of, like, it's so close to being Epic Doom, but it's not. Sort of like Solitude Aeternus, but without the groove and the stuff that makes Solitude Aeternus Doom metal, you know? It really doesn't do it for me. Again, just like a one or two listens, so can't judge too harshly. This is several albums after this. Truth Is What Is, which I think is their first. This rages. This is great. It's, again, kind of taking an American thrash thing. I'd say even taking the technicality up a notch a little bit more than what the standard was at the time. And just destroying. Really great, powerful vocals. Just excellent stuff. You got to keep in mind, I think the guitarist was on the first Pestilence record. So you know, he's coming from that and bringing it into something that's a little bit more refined. Malleus Maleficarum. Okay, I was trying to remember. Yeah, taking the brutality of that first pestilence, which wasn't even fully realized yet. And I am kind of talking out of my ass. I'm not sure if he played on other stuff. I don't know. Didn't research this. But taking that sort of pestilence stuff and applying it to like a little bit cleaner thrash, but it's still like nuts. Balls nuts. Balls nuts. Then I got some Protector CDs. This is the Mad, which is I think their second or third record. I mean, they put out Golem before this. Golem is, again, another great example of, like, brutal German thrash metal and kind of an underrated classic in its own right. I don't think Protector really gets enough love either in terms of, like, talking about Teutonic thrash and stuff like that. This is interesting because I don't know if they've been listening to a lot of SOD or maybe they were getting into the new, like, extreme, like, grind stuff. They still kind of have their initial kind of brutal Teutonic sound, but they're trying to be more like kind of punky with it, and I'm not sure if it works. I'm not sure how I feel about it yet, to be honest. Because the songs are still kind of long, but they still have these kind of like weird rhythmic approaches that are more hardcore almost, it feels like, on this. You know, it's cool. And then this actually, which kicks ass. I didn't know this came out so much later. But this is like almost like a reunion record. Reanimated Homunculus, which is up there for metal album titles for me, is like one of the best ever. And this is, I mean, you know, if you want to just like created in a lab, perfect, gene spliced together Teutonic thrash. I mean, feral snarling. It's got those kind of vocals that you come to expect from this sort of stuff. Yeah, the kind of shrieky sort of vocals. The really precise, sharp riffing. Protector. Reanimated Homunculus. Reanimated Homunculus. Almost sounds like something an actor would say to, like, get their wording right so they don't trip over the words constantly like I do. Yeah, real good stuff. So, that was, like, this past half a year of, like, stuff I've been listening to. And that's about half of it. I may talk about the other half of the stack, or I might just go on to vinyl. And who knows when that'll be, like another 17 months. Who knows? Who cares? But anyway, leave a like, a comment, say what's up. You know, I'm around. You can always say hi. And find me on social media. All that crap. Have a good one.